Tonight, we're going to talk about House of the Dragon, all of it, every season, and we're going looking for the cracks in it, the plot holes, the loose threads, the little mysteries the show opens up and never quite closes. We'll take them slowly, one at a time, starting with the newest season and drifting back to the very beginning. Some are real slips in the writing, some only look like mistakes until you sit with them a while, and some are just quiet changes from the book. I went back through George Martin's Fire and Blood so I could tell you, gently and honestly, which is which. But before we go looking for the places where the story bends, let's just remember what the story actually is. For a little while, House Targaryen ruled the world. Silver-haired kings on the Iron Throne, and above them, dragons, dozens of them, creatures the size of castles, sleeping in the caves beneath Dragonstone, so common that they tucked the eggs into the cradles of newborn children. This was the Golden Age, the family that could not be beaten, because who could ever stand against a house that rode the sky? And then they turned on each other. A father dies, two children both reach for the same crown, and a family that spent a century marrying itself begins to tear itself apart. Brother against sister, mother against son, dragon against dragon. They called it the Dance of the Dragons, such a beautiful name for something so unbearably sad. And by the end of it, the skies of Westeros would be all but empty, the dragons burned out of the world. That's the show we've been watching, a gorgeous, heartbreaking thing. But like anything built this big, it has its cracks. So let's step back into the Age of Dragons and go looking for them, one quiet thread at a time. There are spoilers ahead for every season, and a little Game of Thrones too. My name is Ryan, and I'll be your guide back through the fire and the ash. So let's start where the story is now and drift our way home. Season 3, the one happening right now. Let's begin with the one a lot of people noticed as soon as the episode aired. Daemon takes young Daeron prisoner, and half the audience went, "Hang on, why didn't he take the dragon too? Daeron's a dragon rider, and Daemon just leaves the beast out there." And on first look, that seems sloppy, because a loose dragon is exactly the thing you don't want to leave lying around for the enemy. But sit with it a second, and it mostly holds up. Daemon knows a dragon without its rider is close to useless, and he was planning to kill Daeron anyway, so in his head, the threat's already dead. He's also not a man who'd butcher a dragon, even someone as ruthless as Daemon has that one Targaryen line he won't cross. And the show hints he may have meant to send someone back to collect it, which is peak Daemon, arrogant enough to just assume it'll be sitting there waiting for him. So is it a real hole? Not really. It's Daemon's ego writing a check the show didn't quite cash on screen, and that loose dragon may well come back to bite him later. Messy, not broken, but it's the first thing people pointed at, so it earns the top spot. Here's a heavier one, and it's the death that opens the whole season. Jacaerys, Rhaenyra's eldest son and heir, dies at the Battle of the Gullet, and in the book, Jace goes out fighting, dying in a desperate, meaningful way. The show has him die, almost by accident, distracted, flying too low, too close to the Triarchy's archers, after his dragon Vermax gets harpooned out of the sky. And a lot of book fans hated it, because it turns a heartbreaking heroic death into something that feels pointless. A prince picked off by bad luck and a low flight path. Now you can defend it. War is random, dragons aren't invincible, and the show has leaned hard on the idea that these beasts and their riders can be brought down by clever men with the right weapons. But it stings, because it's the second or third time the show has used the exact same beat, an out-of-control or badly flown dragon getting someone important killed, and when a show reaches for the same trick that often, it stops feeling like tragedy and starts feeling like a crutch. And that leads straight into the biggest structural problem of the season, the thing it caught straight from Game of Thrones: too many characters, spread way too thin. The premiere is dominated by the Battle of the Gullet, which is spectacular, but it means huge players barely show up. Daemon, one of the 3 biggest characters in the whole show, gets something like 5 minutes. Aemond gets almost nothing to do. Criston Cole is basically off in the woods, doing nothing for stretches. Even Rhaenyra, the queen this entire war is named around, spends chunks of the season sidelined. This is exactly what went wrong with late Game of Thrones, a cast so scattered across so many locations that nobody gets room to breathe, and after a 2-year wait between seasons, it makes it hard to lock back into anyone. It's not a plot hole in the technical sense, but it's a genuine storytelling problem, and it's the loudest complaint about the season for a reason. Then there's Rhaenyra, and the thing that keeps making her look naive, even this deep in, after all the blood, after everything Alicent and the Greens have cost her, Rhaenyra keeps entertaining Alicent's peace overtures, keeps extending a trust that the show has given her almost no reason to extend. And there's a version of this that's beautifully tragic. Two old friends who cannot stop reaching for each other even as the world forces them apart. But there's another version, the one a lot of viewers land on, where it just makes the queen look like she hasn't learnt a single thing, trusting the woman whose family murdered her children. The show wants it to read as Rhaenyra's humanity, her refusal to become as cold as the war demands, but push it too far, and it stops looking like humanity, and starts looking like the plot needs her to keep making the same mistake, and that's a fine line the season keeps walking. Now for the book readers, because Season 3 makes some big swings at the source material, and whether you call them mistakes depends on how attached you are to the page. The biggest one, they took the fan-favorite character Nettles, folded her into Rhaena, and had Rhaena tame the wild dragon Sheepstealer way earlier than the story does it. And the problem isn't just that Nettles fans are furious, it's that a half-tamed, barely controlled dragon then goes on to cause chaos in battle, even hitting friendly ships, which loops right back into that same overused beat of uncontrolled dragons wrecking everything. It's a change that costs the story one of its best arcs, and buys another accidental dragon disaster in return, which is not a great trade. And one more big source material swing. They kept young Viserys and Aegon out of the Battle of the Gullet, safe, instead of having them captured the way the book does. Sounds minor. It isn't. Because in the source, young Viserys gets taken across the sea, and that entire Essos storyline, his marriage into the Rhaegar family, the children that come from it, matters enormously to the future of House Targaryen, all the way down to the Targaryens we meet in Game of Thrones. Cutting it keeps things tidier in the short term, but it erases a whole branch of the family tree. Now, this one is a change, not a whole, and the show is allowed to adapt. But it's the kind of change that has fans who know where this is all supposed to go worried, because you can't easily uncut a bloodline. And let's talk about Aemond, because Season 3 does something the book absolutely does not. Alicent travels to Harrenhal, discovers Aemond's relationship with the witch Alice Rivers, and poisons her own son. It's a stunning scene, and Alicent poisoning Aemond is a massive invention, and depending on your taste it's either a bold, tragic escalation of Alicent's arc, a mother finally turning on the monster she raised, or it's the show throwing out the character's book fate for shock value. I lean toward finding it fascinating, because it's the kind of swing that at least commits to something, but it's worth naming as one of the season's biggest departures, and the sort of change that makes long-time readers feel like the show is increasingly writing its own story rather than adapting the one it started with. And a smaller Season 3 itch, the return of Sunfire. Aegon's dragon, badly burned and left for dead after Rook's rest, turns out to be alive, scarred but breathing, and shows up again at a very convenient moment to save Aegon during a battle. And look, Sunfire surviving is straight from the book, so it's not an invention. But the show had left the dragon's status so vague that his sudden reappearance can feel like a rabbit pulled out of a hat, rather than a setup that was properly planted. And it feeds back into that ongoing problem of the show not always keeping clear track of which dragons are alive, hurt, or dead. Great moment for Aegon, a little bit of a wait, where has that dragon been, for everyone keeping score. And staying with the Gullet, here's a fair one. How does the side with the greatest navy in the world get ambushed at sea? The Battle of the Gullet is the Triarchy, the sea power out of the free cities, striking Rhaenyra's fleet and the waters around Dragonstone, and it catches the blacks badly enough to kill a prince. But the blacks are the side built on sea power. The Valyrians command the largest fleet in the world. The whole reason Rhaenyra's cause is a threat is that she rules the waves, so the side that owns the ocean, getting surprised on the ocean, is the sort of thing that makes you blink. Now there's a real answer. The Triarchy allied with the Greens and struck in force, and even the best navy can be caught by a large enemy fleet arriving at the wrong moment. War is chaos, surprise happens. But it does feed the ongoing sense that the show tells you the Valyrian navy is decisive far more than it shows that navy actually controlling anything, right up until the moment it needs that navy to suffer a shocking blow. The greatest fleet in the world spends the show either off-screen or losing, which is a strange fate for something described as a war-winning advantage. Let's talk about the harpoons, because the Battle of the Gullet leans hard on ships shooting dragons out of the sky, and it's worth poking at. Vermax gets harpooned, Jace goes down, and the season keeps hammering the idea that men with the right gear on the right deck can drop a dragon. And thematically I actually love this. It's the show insisting dragons are not gods, that they bleed, that a brave crew with scorpions and harpoons can bring one down. That's good. It raises the stakes. But it also cuts against everything else the show keeps telling you about how absolutely terrifying and unstoppable these things are. So you get this whiplash, where a dragon is an apocalypse in one scene and a big harpoon target in the next. It's not a hole so much as a tension the show never fully resolves. How deadly a dragon actually is depends a lot on whether the plot needs it to win or lose that day. Rhaenyra's whole sheep-stealer arc is another one people flagged, and not just because of the nettles thing. The resolution of it lands rushed. She spends the season chasing this wild dragon, and then the payoff, her taming it and getting captured and hauled back to the Red Keep, arrives so fast and with so little emotional build-up that it feels skipped rather than earned. And that's a pattern with this season. Big moments that should breathe getting crammed in because there are simply too many plots to service. So Rhaenyra finally getting what she wanted her whole life should be huge, and instead it kind of flies by, which is a shame, because it's exactly the kind of payoff the earlier seasons would have given real room. Then there's Mysaria, who this season maneuvers herself into Rhaenyra's bed, and, more importantly, into real influence, and some viewers found the turn abrupt, a relationship escalating fast, at a convenient moment, and positioning Mysaria for power, right when the plot needs a new player whispering in the Queen's ear. Now Mysaria has always been a survivor who reads people better than they read her, so her climbing closer to power is on brand. But the speed of it, and the timing, is the sort of thing that reads to some people as the show moving a piece where it needs it, rather than letting the relationship grow on its own, and it's fair to raise, and keep an eye on the dragon seeds, because this is where a Season 2 setup pays off, and it's ugly. Ulf, one of the common-born riders Rhaenyra lifted up, gets seduced into betrayal, Aemond Hightower dangling Driftmark and a lordship in front of him. And this isn't a hole at all. It's the show cashing in exactly the warning it planted, that handing god-level power to people with nothing to lose is a gamble that can turn on you. I'm including it because it's the opposite of a plot hole. It's a setup paying off, and it's worth pointing out that the show does do this well when it wants to, which makes the times it fumbles a thread stand out more. For the book readers, there's the Maelor problem, and it's a real one. In the source, Helaena has a second son named Maelor, and he's part of one of the most horrifying moments of the entire war. The show cut him entirely, which changed the shape of Blood and Cheese and left a hole where a major, gut-wrenching book sequence should go. Season 3 has been hinting it might find a way to fix or work around that gap, but it's the clearest example of an early adaptation choice, cutting a child to streamline the cast, creating a problem the later seasons have to scramble to patch. Cut a character early, pay for it later. And here's a quieter Season 3 question that follows straight from Rook's Rest. How is Aegon back on his feet and back on a dragon this fast? The man was cooked. After Rook's Rest, Aegon is a ruin, burned over most of his body, shattered bones barely clinging to life, the kind of injuries that in this world mean either death or a lifetime as a broken invalid. And Season 3 does show him suffering, in agony, dependent on milk of the poppy and on the maesters, but it also needs him functional enough to be king, to give speeches, to eventually get back into the fight when Sunfire returns. And the gap between how devastatingly he was hurt and how much he's still able to do can feel like the show wanting the tragedy of his wounds and the utility of a mobile king at the same time. Now medieval fantasy doesn't owe us a burn unit recovery timeline, and a Targaryen's resilience is its own kind of magic, but a viewer who remembers just how destroyed Aegon looked after Rook's rest is allowed to raise an eyebrow at how much he's up and doing by Season 3, because catastrophic burns don't usually come with a comeback tour. And here's a structural echo a lot of viewers flagged in Season 3. Aemond at Harrenhal is basically Demon at Harrenhal all over again. We just spent a whole season watching Demon get bogged down at that haunted castle, tangled up with the witch Alice Rivers, having visions, drifting away from the war while everyone waited. And now Season 3 parks Aemond in the exact same place, with the exact same woman, drifting from the war in the exact same way. And whatever you think of it individually, the repetition is hard to miss. The show sending a second major dragon rider to the same castle to be seduced and stalled by the same sorceress, 2 seasons running. It can read as intentional. Harrenhal is a cursed place that swallows ambitious Targaryen men, which is a real and eerie idea, but it can also read as the writers reaching for a move that worked once and running it back because they needed to keep another powerful piece off the board for a while. Harrenhal is starting to feel less like a location and more like the show's designated parking lot for characters it doesn't know what to do with, and when your story keeps benching its heaviest hitters in the same spot, viewers notice. And honestly, the broadest Season 3 complaint is just tone and consistency. The reviews for the back half keep using words like messy, melodramatic, wildly inconsistent, an episode lurching from one of the best scenes in the series, Aegon's speech as Sunfire returns, straight into stuff that feels rushed or unearned. And that's not a plot hole, it's a quality wobble, a season swinging for huge highs and not always landing the connective tissue between them. I point it out because it's the real thing under a lot of the plot hole complaints, people feeling the story get shakier and reaching for the nearest word to describe it. Sometimes it's a genuine hole, sometimes it's just the show trying to juggle too much at once and dropping a ball here and there. And quick note before we drop back a season, because it matters. A lot of the stuff people called plot holes at the end of Season 2 turned out to just be cliffhangers, and Season 3 actually answered them. Where was Otto imprisoned? Turns out that thread pays off fast. He ends up beheaded on Rhaenyra's command once she takes King's Landing. When's the Battle of the Gullet? It opens Season 3. Does Rhaena get her dragon? Yes, she tames Sheepstealer. Are the new dragon riders a problem? Oh, absolutely. Ulf's betrayal is already brewing. So keep that in mind as a general rule with this show. An unanswered question at the end of a season usually isn't a hole, it's a setup. The show tends to pay these off, which is why it's worth separating "the show hasn't gotten there yet" from "the show broke its own logic." Okay, back in time we go. Let's start Season 2, where Season 2 starts, with blood and cheese, one of the most shocking things this show has ever done, and also one that leaves you with questions. Daemon hires 2 killers to slip into the Red Keep and take a life in revenge for Lucerys, and they get all the way into the royal family's private chambers. And the thing you can't help asking is, how? This is supposed to be the most heavily guarded castle in the realm, and 2 hired men just stroll to the heart of it. Now there are answers. Castles are big, guards are bribable, and Myseria's network clearly greased the wheels. But the ease of it is the sort of thing that nags. A security lapse that only really happens because the scene needs to happen. Honestly, this is a case where I give the show a pass, because the sequence is so devastating that arguing about door security feels like missing the point. It's built to gut you, not to survive a logic audit, and it absolutely guts you. then Rook's Rest, and the moment the whole fandom is still arguing about, when Aemond, up on Vhagar, lets loose dragonfire that catches not just the enemy but his own brother, King Aegon, on Sunfire, and sends both of them crashing down horribly burned. And the show flat refuses to tell you whether that was a chaotic accident in a 3-dragon dogfight or cold, calculated fratricide. And I want to be clear, this is not a plot hole. It's a deliberate ambiguity, and it's one of the best things the show has ever done, which is why people mistake it for a gap. Everything about Aemond, the ambition, the resentment, the hunger to finally be the one in charge, makes the dark reading terribly easy to believe, and the way he steps into power, while his brother lies broken, does nothing to clear him, but the show leaves just enough room for the fog of war. Is he a would-be kinslayer, or a ruthless man who simply didn't try very hard to avoid a convenient outcome? The show is savoring that question, not fumbling it. And here's the one at Rook's Rest that actually is a fair nitpick. How does the biggest dragon in the world ambush anyone? Vhagar is the size of a hill, the largest living thing in Westeros, and yet she lies in wait and drops on Rhaenys and Meleys before they see her coming. And Rhaenys is a veteran flyer on a fast, fierce dragon, exactly the kind of rider you'd expect to spot a threat that enormous. The save is that it was a planned trap, Criston's army used as bait, Vhagar grounded and hidden behind terrain until the last second, and a dragon bursting up from cover can catch even a good rider off guard, so it holds together. But the sheer size of Vhagar is the thing that makes people squint, the idea that something that colossal could stay hidden until it's too late. Spectacle-bending plausibility, just a little. Season 2 also leans hard on that classic dragon travel time problem, especially during the Red Sowing, where dragons cross huge distances in what feels like no time at all, while everyone on the ground crawls. We covered why this one's more of a TV compression thing than a true hole, but Season 2 is where it gets really noticeable. Dragons basically teleporting to wherever the plot needs them, and it ties into the bigger Season 2 frustration, the slow, hesitant start to the actual war. Both sides have dragons, the deadliest weapons alive, so why all the creeping and negotiating instead of just ending it? And the show has a smart answer here. The terror is mutual. Commit your dragons, and you risk losing them, and dragons can't be replaced. So both sides are frozen by dread, each scared to be the first to start the slaughter that burns away their own greatest advantage. Rhaenyra especially stalls because she understands that the moment dragons start killing dragons, her family's power starts dying with them. So it's dread, not cowardice, but plenty of people found it slow, so it belongs on the list. And while we're on the greens, Criston Cole and the strange art of failing upward. By Season 2, Criston is Hand of the King and the Greens' top military commander, and his actual track record is not good. He provokes catastrophe at Rook's Rest that gets his own king horribly burned. He marches an army around the Riverlands to increasingly mixed results, and his judgment keeps looking driven more by wounded pride and personal grudges than by strategy. And yet he stays Hand, stays in command, keeps the crown's trust. And you can explain it. Aegon's court is thin on competent, loyal men. Criston is fanatically devoted to the Greens, and there's nobody obvious to replace him with. Loyalty covers a lot when your bench is empty. But it does stretch belief that a commander with his results holds on to the two most important jobs in the war effort, without anyone seriously moving against him. And it feeds the sense that the Green Council is less a room full of schemers than a handful of people improvising badly. Whether that's the show being realistic about mediocre men clinging to power, or the show needing Criston in position for the plot, is a fair thing to chew on. And while we're in Season 2, let's talk about Daemon, because his character gives some people whiplash. One minute he's Rhaenyra's fierce right hand and lover, the next he's sulking off to Harrenhal in a huff after a fight, basically abandoning the war effort to go have fever dreams in a haunted castle for half a season. And yes, the Harrenhal stuff is beautiful. It humbles him, it breaks his pride, it finally bends him to Rhaenyra. But the swing from devoted partner to petty deserter and back again can feel less like a character arc and more like the show parking its most powerful piece somewhere quiet, because it didn't know what else to do with him for a while. So is it deep character work, a proud man who has to be broken before he can serve, or is it the writer's benching demon so he doesn't solve the war too fast? Honestly, it's a bit of both, and where you land depends on how much patience you have for a whole season of a dragon-riding warlord staring at walls. It works in the end, it just tests you getting there. Here's a fun Season 2 nitpick. How does the single most wanted woman in the realm just stroll into the enemy capital? Rhaenyra, whose face every green in King's Landing would kill for, sneaks into the city in disguise to have a secret face-to-face with Alicent in the Sept. And it's a gorgeous scene, two former friends meeting in the belly of the enemy. But the logistics of it are wild if you stop and think. The claimant to the throne, the person the Greens most want dead, slips into the most dangerous city for her in the world, gets a private audience with the Queen Dowager, and slips back out, all without being caught. You can hand-wave it, Mysaria's network, a good disguise, sheer nerve, but it's the sort of moment the show pulls off on pure emotional force, daring you to care too much about the meeting to ask how she got in the door. And if you do ask, the answer is basically the plot needed it to happen. And let's talk about the Red Sowing, because the Season 2 finale unleashes something that raises a question the whole saga sort of tiptoes around: just how much dragon-riding Targaryen blood is floating around in the gutters of King's Landing. Rhaenyra, desperate for riders, calls for the dragon seeds, common-born people with a drop of Targaryen blood, to come and try to claim the wild, riderless dragons on Dragonstone. And it works. Hugh Hammer, a blacksmith, claims the mighty Vermithor. Ulf, a drunk, claims Silverwing. Adam of Hull claims Seasmoke. 3 commoners, 3 dragons in an afternoon. And it's a fantastic sequence, but it pokes a hole in the mystique the show spent 2 seasons building. The idea that dragon riding is this sacred, near-sacred birthright of one god-touched family. Because if there are enough secret Targaryen bastards knocking around the docks that you can staff an air force from a single open casting call, then the exclusivity that makes the Targaryens special starts to wobble. The show's answer is that centuries of Targaryen men fathering bastards left blood scattered everywhere, which is true to the world, but it does make you ask why, in 200 years, nobody thought to do this before it got this desperate, and why the family that guards dragon riding so jealously turns out to be surrounded by people who can do it too. It's a thrilling scene that slightly cheapens its own magic. And here's the strategic question that hangs over the entire war, the one every viewer asks at some point: why doesn't Rhaenyra just fly to King's Landing and burn it down? She has the bigger dragons, more of them, and her rival's whole claim sits in one city. One determined morning on Syrax and Caraxes and Vermithor could end this. And the show's answer is actually one of its smartest ideas. So this isn't a hole, but it's worth spelling out because so many people treat it like one. The answer is mutual assured destruction. The Greens have Vhagar, the single most terrifying weapon in the world, and if Rhaenyra commits her dragons to an attack, Vhagar answers, and dragons start killing dragons, and dragons cannot be replaced. Burn King's Landing, and you might win the city while losing the very thing that makes you a queen instead of just another claimant. Plus, Rhaenyra really does not want to be the monster who roasts 500,000 small folk to take a chair. So the paralysis is deliberate, it's dread and conscience both. But the show doesn't always make that logic loud enough on screen, so a casual viewer just sees 2 sides sitting on world-ending weapons and doing a lot of talking, and reasonably wonders why. The reason is good. The show could stand to say it out loud more often. And here's a Season 2 one that only gets louder over time. Helena has a dragon and never fights. Helena is a dragon rider. She's bonded to Dreamfire, a large, old, formidable dragon, and in a war where both sides are scrambling so hard for dragons that they're pulling drunks off the docks to try to claim wild ones, the Greens have a fully grown, fully bonded dragon just sitting in the capital, unused. And the show's answer is character. Helen is gentle, traumatized, wants no part of killing, and after blood and cheese she's shattered. So it makes complete sense that she personally refuses to go to war. But it's still striking that in a conflict this desperate, this decided by dragon count, one whole dragon on the green side is effectively benched for reasons of temperament, and nobody in that ruthless council seems able to do anything about it. It's realistic and frustrating at once, a reminder that these weapons are people too, with wills of their own, which is why the war can't just be solved by whoever has more of them. And the blockade nobody can break, the starving of King's Landing. Rhaenyra's side, with that great Valyrian fleet, throttles the sea approaches to King's Landing, and the city begins to starve. Bread riots, desperation, the small folk turning on their rulers, and it's some of the show's best material. The human cost of a war between dragon lords landing on the people who never chose it. But it does raise the question, why can't the Greens, sitting on Viarg and other dragons, simply burn the blockade away, or escort the food in? And the answer loops back to that mutual dread. Using dragons invites the enemy's dragons, and nobody wants to be first to start the slaughter in the sky. So the most powerful faction in the world watches its own capital starve, rather than risk its dragons. That's thematically rich, power paralyzed by its own power. But it's also the kind of situation where a viewer reasonably asks why one side, with the biggest dragon alive, can't solve a food shortage. And the honest answer is that the terror of dragon-on-dragon war freezes everyone, which the show could stand to underline more clearly than it does. And Season 2 really kicks off the dragon bookkeeping problem that only gets worse in Season 3. By the end of the season, the show is juggling a lot of dragons, some claimed, some wild, some hurt, some presumed dead. And it gets really hard to keep a clear tally of who holds the advantage in the sky. And that matters more than it sounds, because this entire war comes down to dragons, so your sense of who's actually winning depends on knowing the count. When that count goes fuzzy, the tension leaks, because it's hard to feel the weight of a dragon dying or being claimed if you're not sure what the board looked like a minute ago. The show keeps the marquee dragons vivid, Vhagar, Caraxes, Sunfire, but the supporting roster is a lot to track, and it's fair to wish someone in the writer's room kept a scoreboard we could see. And now the big one, the granddaddy of them all. And it's a Season 1 decision that only detonates later, the Seasmoke problem. The rule the whole world runs on is dead simple. A dragon takes one rider for life, and it will not accept another while that rider still breathes. Not a vibe, a hard rule. The show says it, the book says it. In the book, Laenor dies, which cleanly frees his dragon Seasmoke for someone new. Easy. But the show got clever back in Season 1 and let Laenor live, faked his death, put him on a boat to Essos with the man he loved, gave him the one happy ending anybody gets in this whole bloodbath. Beautiful moment, really. Except then, seasons later, a young man named Adam of Hull claims Seasmoke and flies him for the Blacks. And if Laenor is still out there, alive, Seasmoke should still be bonded to him and should torch Adam on sight. So a lovely Season 1 mercy created a hole that the later seasons have to limp around. Either the show breaks its biggest dragon rule, or it has to invent an idea it never set up, that the bond fades when a rider abandons his dragon and vanishes. Maybe that's the fix. But as it stands, this is the one you cannot really wave away, the bill for Laenor's happy ending, and the show still hasn't paid it. Next, the one that actually bothers me. Criston Cole commits open murder and just walks it off. At Rhaenyra and Laenor's wedding, packed hall, the whole realm watching, Criston beats Joffrey Lonmouth to death with his bare hands, not a quiet knife in a corner, a brutal, public killing, and Joffrey was Laenor's lover, and a knight tied to a noble house, and then, nothing. No trial, no reckoning, no house showing up demanding justice. Criston just climbs, all the way to Lord Commander, and eventually Hand of the King. And this one's harder to defend than the dragon stuff, because it's not about magic rules, it's cause and effect. A public murder at a royal wedding should wreck somebody's life. You can invent excuses, blamed on a brawl, covered up by Alicent, everyone wanting to bury an embarrassing bloodbath, and the killing does its job. It welds Criston to the greens forever. But a man committing open murder in front of the realm and paying zero price only holds up because the story needs him rising, not hanging. Then Aemond and the very confusing math of his eye, a season 1 setup that pays off oddly for the rest of the show. As a bleeding kid at Driftmark, having just claimed Vagar and lost an eye to Larys, he says it was worth it. An eye for the biggest dragon alive, he'd do it again. Cold line tells you who he becomes. But for the rest of the show he's defined by rage over that eye. It eats him alive. It drives him to chase Larys through a storm and, accident or not, kill him. So which is it? Fair trade, or the wound that poisons his whole life? And I think it's both, on purpose. A proud, humiliated kid can say it was worth it to save face and still spend a decade seething that he got maimed and blamed while the strong boys walked away clean. People are contradictory like that, especially the broken ones. So I read it as one angry man holding two feelings at once. Not a mistake, but a lot of viewers call it inconsistent, and it's a fun one to fight about. Otto Hightower is next, because the realm's smartest schemer keeps doing dumb things. Otto is the patient spider, decades of quiet plotting, and then he sails to Dragonstone to confront Demon with maybe 20 men to face a guy with a castle, an army, and a dragon. That's a suicide move, and it only works because Rhaenyra shows up on her own dragon and cools it down. So, whole or character? You can read it as a bluff. Otto betting Demon wants a dramatic scene and legitimacy, not to murder the hand of the king in front of witnesses and turn the realm against himself. Under that read, it's nerve, not stupidity. But the flip side is that the show just needed Otto there for the scene and put him in a spot a real mastermind never would. Brilliance or plot convenience, depending how generous you feel. Then the Stepstones, where two dragons somehow can't win a war. Demon and Corlys are stuck for years against a warlord called the Crab Feeder, even though they have dragons. And the move that finally cracks it, one dragon draws the enemy out, the other strikes. Looks like something you'd try on day 1, not year 3. But the show has a real answer, which makes this a nitpick, not a hole. The Crab Feeder's men hide in caves and tunnels, exactly where dragonfire can't reach, and where a grounded dragon becomes a big target for a wall of archers. A dragon rules the open sky. It's useless for digging rats out of rock. Even dragons have limits. That's the whole point. What gets it flagged is the winning move arriving so late and looking so obvious that the years of struggle feel like the plot stalling for a cool moment. And the open secret nobody acts on, the strong boys. Rhaenyra's 3 older sons are supposed to be Laenor's, pure Valyrian blood, which should mean silver hair and violet eyes. Instead, all 3 have dark hair and the obvious look of Sir Harwin Strong. Everyone at court can see it. It's the worst kept secret in the realm, whispered right out in the open, and it stabs straight at whether her heirs are even legitimate. And for years, nothing sticks, because Viserys refuses to hear a word against his grandsons, at one point threatening to rip out the tongue of anyone who says it. So fear of the king explains the silence. But it's still wild that something this visible, this damaging, this central to the Greens' whole case, sits there for years without blowing up. A lit fuse the show keeps lit without letting it go off. And whether that reads as tension or a stretch depends how much you buy a whole court biting its tongue out of fear of one dying king. And speaking of Harwin, here's a properly dark one the show mostly lets slide, the Harrenhal fire, and how Larys Strong gets away with everything. Larys, the club-footed younger son nobody takes seriously, arranges to have Harrenhal burned so that his own father Lionel, the Hand of the King, and his older brother Harwin both die in the blaze. And the payoff is enormous. Larys becomes Lord of Harrenhal, one of the largest castles in the realm, and clears his family tree of everyone standing between him and the seat in a single night. And the thing that nags is that nobody investigates. The Hand of the King burns to death in a freak fire at the same moment his second son inconveniently inherits everything, and the realm just shrugs. Now the show does give you a quiet answer. Larys is careful. He uses condemned men whose tongues he's had cut out so they can't talk. And he's exactly the kind of person everyone underestimates precisely because he's disabled and soft-spoken. That's the whole point of Larys. He weaponizes being overlooked, so it's less a hole than a chilling demonstration of how a patient, invisible man commits the perfect crime. But the sheer convenience of it, a fire that kills exactly the two people Larys needed dead and no one else important, is the sort of thing that should have drawn one hard question at court, and never really does. And here's a big one from the deathbed. Alicent's fatal misunderstanding of Viserys's dying words, which is either the show's most devastating piece of tragic irony or its most convenient contrivance, depending on how you feel. Viserys, dying, drugged on milk of the poppy, mistakes Alicent for Rhaenyra in the dark and starts murmuring about the prophecy, Aegon's dream, the song of ice and fire, the belief that a Targaryen must sit the throne to face the coming darkness. He's talking about Aegon the Conqueror, the dream that started the whole dynasty, but he says the name Aegon, and Alicent, who has never been told a word about this prophecy, hears him name their son Aegon as his chosen heir with his last breath. And that misunderstanding is the spark that lights the war. It's why Alicent believes, sincerely, that she's honoring her husband's true wish by crowning her boy. Now, as tragedy, this is gorgeous. Two people separated by a secret Viserys never shared. A whole civil war built on a father's mumble in the dark. But the nitpick is real too. It's an awfully tidy coincidence. The one moment Viserys finally speaks the prophecy aloud, he's confused about who he's talking to and uses a name that happens to belong to his son. Lean one way, and it's fate. Lean the other, and it's the plot needing a misunderstanding and building a perfect one. I land on tragedy, but I understand the people who call it too convenient by half. And while we're in the throne room, Aemond Valyrian and the head that just rolls. Aemond, Corlys's brother, stands up in open court and says the obvious thing everyone's been whispering, that Rhaenyra's sons are bastards and have no claim to Driftmark, and he calls Rhaenyra a word to her face. And Daemon walks up and takes his head off, right there, mid-sentence, in front of the king and the whole court, and again, nothing. No house rises in fury, no reckoning for a prince murdering a lord of a great house during a royal audience for the crime of saying something true. Now you can defend it. Daemon is a prince and a dragon rider, and the realm fears him. Viserys is too weak to punish him, and Aemond did just insult the king's daughter to the king's face. But stack it next to Criston beating a man to death at the wedding, and you start to notice a pattern. The show really likes public killings that carry zero consequences because consequences would slow the story down. One such moment is drama. 3 or 4 of them starts to look like a world where the powerful can murder in the open whenever the script wants a jolt. What is actually killing Viserys? All through season 1 we watch the poor man rot, losing pieces of himself to some wasting disease until it finally takes him. And Paddy Considine is astonishing in it, but the show never names the thing. It's just this mysterious, almost symbolic decay, the king's body falling apart as the realm he holds together does the same. On a theme level, beautiful. It only becomes a nitpick if you want concrete rules, because a disease that behaves however the plot needs, timed perfectly to the drama, is a touch convenient, not a hole in any real sense. Illness is illness, and leaving it unnamed is a deliberate artistic call, but the literal-minded viewer clocks it, even while the rest of us take it as one of the best things in the whole show. Why does Rhaenys spare the Greens when she has them dead to rights? One of the wildest moments of season 1, she bursts up through the floor of the dragon pit at Aegon's coronation on Melies, scatters the crowd, and comes face to face with the entire Green leadership, helpless in front of a furious dragon, and she doesn't burn them. Lets them feel how close it is, then flies off, and half the audience is yelling that she could have ended the whole war in one breath of fire. But I'd defend this hard, because it's character, not error. Rhaenys is not the kind of person who torches a hall full of hundreds of innocent small folk to kill a few usurpers, whatever grudge she carries, as the queen who never was. Her mercy is a real moral choice, and the show is deliberately setting her restraint against the ruthlessness this war is about to demand. It gets called a wasted chance, and even characters bring it up later. But that's the point. A human choice, with a terrible cost, is not a plot hole. Here's a small Season 1 thread the show plants, and then just drops: the white stag. During Aegon's hunt, the show goes heavy on symbolism. A rare white hart, a classic sign of true kingship, appears in the woods, and it's Rhaenyra, off on her own, who meets a white stag, while Aegon gets stuck with a lesser kill. The show all but whispers that the omens of kingship point at Rhaenyra, not the boy the Greens will crown, and then that whole thread of mystical omen reading just evaporates. So was it real foreshadowing, or pretty mood lighting? For a show that usually plants symbols on purpose, dropping a loaded one and never circling back leaves you wondering. It just sits there, a dangling piece of meaning. A careful show usually pays off, and didn't. Then there's Driftmark, the seat a huge chunk of Season 1 fights over, the succession, the bitter question of whether Rhaenyra's dark-haired sons can really inherit that pure Valyrian line. It drives enormous drama, the eye-gouging, the whispers, Corlys and Rhaenys grieving their own kids. And then, as the war swallows everything, the clean answer to who actually holds Driftmark long-term just gets tangled into the chaos instead of tied off. Less a hole than a thread the war overtakes. But for something the show invested so heavily in, the fate of that seat is worth keeping an eye on, because the deaths keep reshuffling who might end up holding one of the most powerful chairs in the realm. A couple of quick ongoing ones that started in Season 1 and never fully went away. The dragons that grow and shrink to fit the scene, where Vhagar is an unstoppable titan in one fight and a more even match in the next, which is mostly just the difficulty of staging exciting monster combat, but it comes up. And the time jumps and recasting, the way Season 1 leaps across years and swaps the actresses for Rhaenyra and Alicent partway through, which is a bold move that mostly works but leaves a lot of people unsure how much time has passed and how old all these kids are supposed to be. Not contradictions, just heavy lifts the show hands you, and a big reason a recap like this is even useful. And here's a foundational one that the whole war rests on: the sworn oaths that evaporate. Early in Season 1, Viserys names Rhaenyra his heir, and has the great lords of the realms kneel and swear fealty to her, one by one, a solemn public oath, witnessed by the king and the gods. It's the bedrock of her claim. Hundreds of the most powerful men in Westeros, bound by sacred vow to put her on the throne. And then Viserys dies, the Greens crown Aegon, and most of those oaths just cease to matter. Lords who swore to Rhaenyra shrug and bend to whoever's nearest with a dragon. Now the show and the world do have answers. Oaths bend to power and self-interest. A woman had never actually ruled, so many lords were sworn against their own instincts, and years passed to cool the memory of that day. Men are faithless when a throne's in play. That's basically the theme of the whole franchise. But it's worth sitting with how little those oaths ultimately weigh, because the show presents that swearing as a huge binding moment, and then a big chunk of the realm treats it as barely a suggestion the second it's inconvenient. Either oaths mean something, or they don't, and the show kind of wants them to mean everything when Rhaenyra needs them, and nothing when the plot needs a war. And one last Season 1 flavored oddity, the Targaryen madness the show barely touches. Game of Thrones made a whole meal of Targaryen incest, and the coin flip between greatness and madness in the bloodline. House of the Dragon, a show entirely about Targaryens marrying Targaryens, is weirdly quiet about the fallout, mostly treating the madness question lightly instead of as the looming curse the older show leaned on. It's a choice, not a mistake. The show cares more about ambition and love and politics, which is honestly the richer road. But it's a curious gap in emphasis for the story most directly about generations of this family marrying each other, and it only really stands out if you're holding both shows in your head at once, which, if you're still with me, you clearly are. We can't finish without the two that reach across both shows, because they're the biggest talking points of all. First, the prophecy that might break Game of Thrones. Across seasons 1 and 2, Viserys passes his heir a secret, the dream of Aegon the Conqueror, a prophecy called A Song of Ice and Fire, warning that a darkness is coming from the north, and that a Targaryen has to hold the throne to unite the realm against it. Gorgeous idea, gives the whole family a sacred purpose. One problem, it wrecks the timeline of the show that comes after. Because 200 years later in Game of Thrones, nobody knows any of this. Daenerys never mentions a secret warning about the White Walkers, and the family did nothing to prepare the realm for the exact threat they supposedly knew was coming. So how does a secret guarded king to heir just vanish by Dany's day? That's a real gap, and it only exists because this show was written years after Game of Thrones and is reaching back to add meaning nobody planned for. But here's the twist that makes it interesting instead of just annoying. That same prophecy also fixes one of Game of Thrones' oldest failures. For years that show dangled the prince that was promised. The chosen one born amid salt and smoke to wake dragons from stone, and never clearly paid it off. Never confirmed if it was Jon or Dany, it just shrugged and dropped it. And House of the Dragon reaches back and answers it, because in Daemon's visions at Harrenhal, we see the White Walkers, and we see Daenerys stepping out of the fire unburnt with her 3 newborn dragons, the exact image of that prophecy coming true. So the prophecy does 2 opposite things at once. It reopens one hole while patching another. Whether that trade is worth it is up to you. Me, I'll take it, because it makes the whole dynasty and Dany's existence feel like one connected design. But if you think the prequel is rewriting history to hand itself grandeur the original never earned, I honestly can't tell you you're wrong. And riding shotgun with that prophecy, the dagger that suddenly means everything, the Valyrian steel catspaw blade gets a huge promotion. The show putting the Song of Ice and Fire prophecy on it, in letters only visible when heated, treating it as a sacred heirloom passed down with the secret. Cool image. 1 issue. That exact dagger is a big deal in Game of Thrones, and there it means something totally different. It's the anonymous assassin's blade, sent to kill Bran, and eventually the knife Arya drives into the Night King, and nobody there ever mentions a glowing prophecy hidden in it. So it's a retcon, plain and simple. The generous read is a beautiful full circle. The blade that carries the prophecy is the blade that ends the threat it warned about. The harsh read is that if this thing was such a treasured relic, it's real weird it ended up a nameless assassin's knife with a forgotten owner by Dany's day. Both are fair, and it's exactly the sort of thing lore fans love to brawl over, which is the whole point of a video like this, as long as we're honest that it's a retcon and not pretend the 2 shows planned it all along. And here's one that lore fans love, the 2 lost swords, Blackfire and Dark Sister. The Targaryens own 2 of the most famous Valyrian steel blades in the world. Blackfire, the sword of Aegon the Conqueror and the kings after him, and Dark Sister, the slim blade that goes to the great warriors of the family. And in this era we see them. Viserys sits a court where the ancestral sword is a real object, and Daemon carries Dark Sister into battle. These are priceless, irreplaceable, sacred family heirlooms. And then, by the time of Game of Thrones 2 centuries later, both of them are simply gone. Nobody knows where Blackfire or Dark Sister ended up. They've vanished from history, and the show set during the dance is dangling them right in front of us, knowing they eventually disappear. Now this isn't really the show's mistake. It's a genuine open mystery George R.R. Martin has never fully resolved, even in the books. The swords get carried off into later rebellions and lost, but it's the sort of thing House of the Dragon reminds us of, showing us treasures we know are destined to slip out of the family's hands. And it's a fair thread to pull, because a dynasty this obsessed with its own legacy, losing track of its 2 holiest blades, is a striking gap when you hold both eras side by side. And one more little cross-show thread lore fans enjoy. The eggs. Daenerys hatches her 3 dragons in Game of Thrones from petrified eggs given to her as a wedding gift. Eggs said to be ancient, turned to stone, treasures from the Shadowlands beyond Ashai, and the Targaryens of House of the Dragon are swimming in dragon eggs. They place them in the cradles of their newborns, as a matter of course. Rhaenyra does it. It's tradition. So where do all these eggs go? And could any of the three that eventually reached Daenerys trace back to this era? The books hint the family scattered and lost eggs over the generations. Some hatched, many didn't, and a few slipped out of the family entirely as the dragons died out. So it's not a hole, it's a poignant connection. The same magic that's so common here that they tuck it into a baby's blanket becomes, 2 centuries later, 3 impossible relics that reignite the entire species. It's the kind of link that makes watching this show feel like reading the first chapter of something you already know the ending to. And the biggest lore question hanging over everything: where did all the dragons go? This show has dozens of them. The skies over Westeros are thick with dragons, Vhagar and Caraxes and Vermithor and Sunfire and a dozen more. An age when the Targaryens rule the world precisely because they command the most terrifying weapons that have ever existed. And then in Game of Thrones, there are none. The dragons are extinct, gone for over a century, until Daenerys hatches 3 from stone in a funeral pyre, and it's treated as a world-shaking miracle because nothing like it has happened in living memory. And House of the Dragon is, in a real sense, the story of how that happened. The dance is the war that burns the dragons out of the world, dragon killing dragon, until the species collapses, and the few survivors dwindle and shrink, and finally die chained in a pit. So this isn't a hole, it's the answer to one. This whole show is the explanation for the emptiness of the later skies. But it's worth naming as the great tragic engine under all of it, that everything we're watching, all this power, all these magnificent beasts, is a golden age actively setting itself on fire, and we're watching the beginning of the end of dragons in the world. Every dragon you fall in love with here is one the future doesn't have. More loose threads across the whole show. Before we wrap, a handful more that stretch across seasons, because these come up constantly. First, the greatest navy in the world, and where is it for so long? The Valyrians under Corlys command the biggest fleet in the realm. And that sea power is a huge reason Rhaenyra's side is a real threat. So you keep waiting for it to just decide things, and for a long time it doesn't. The answer is mostly that the big naval payoff was being saved for the Battle of the Gullet, which finally lands in Season 3, so it wasn't forgotten, it was loaded. But for stretches before that, a war supposedly ruled at sea by an unbeatable fleet somehow spends most of its time on land and in the air, and that gap between how decisive the navy is described as being and how much it actually does is a fair thing to notice. Then, where did the gods go? One thing lore fans clock is how small a role religion plays here compared to Game of Thrones. In the later era, the faith of the Seven is a massive force, capable of raising fanatical armies and humbling a queen. In House of the Dragon, at the height of Targaryen power, organized religion is weirdly muted, barely a factor in a war over a contested throne, which is exactly the kind of moment the faith would normally jump on. There are reasons. The Targaryens at their peak held the faith in check, and the show is laser-focused on the family itself, but it's a noticeable difference in texture, and it leaves a mild question about where all that religious power was during this era. Here's one from the coronation. How did the Greens pull it off so smoothly? When Viserys dies, they move fast, keep the death secret, and crown Aegon before the Blacks can blink. And it basically works with shockingly little resistance inside King's Landing, even though the Great Lords had all sworn oaths to Rhaenyra, with the king watching. The show's answer is real. Coups succeed through speed and preparation against an unready opponent. And the Greens had been getting ready for years, while Rhaenyra was caught flat-footed on Dragonstone, so it's defensible. But it's fair to notice how cleanly a century of tradition and a room full of sworn oaths gets brushed aside in a single day, and to wonder whether more of those sworn lords would have balked in the moment than the wild dragons just napping under Dragonstone. The Red Sowing reveals the island has been sitting on several powerful, unclaimed dragons the whole time, including the enormous Vermithor. So why did it take total desperation before anyone tried to put riders on them, when the blacks knew that power was right under their feet? The show's answer is risk and taboo. Claiming a wild dragon kills most who try, and putting common folk on noble dragons is a line the Targaryens hate to cross until they have to. So the hesitation tracks. But sitting on the deadliest weapons in the world, and only reaching for them at the last second, reads as either caution or convenient timing, depending on your mood. Helena is a whole quiet mystery, and I don't think the show has decided how much to tell us. She keeps dropping these dreamy lines that come true, and she reads more and more like a real dreamer, the same gift that let Daenerys the Dreamer foresee the doom of Valyria and save the whole family. So how much of this coming horror can she already see, and is anyone ever going to listen to her? That's not a hole. It's the show holding a card back. But it's one of the most intriguing unanswered things in the whole series. A fragile woman who might know exactly how it all ends and can't get anyone to hear her. Daemon's Harrenhal visions are another open one. That whole strange stretch, Alice Rivers guiding him through fevered glimpses of past and future, breaks his pride and finally bends him to Rhaenyra. But it also showed him a lot. The darkness coming, the true enemy, things way bigger than his war for a chair. And the show keeps it murky, how much he actually believes or understood, and what he does with it now. A demon who's glimpsed the real destiny of his house is a different, more dangerous man than the reckless prince who started this. And the show is deliberately keeping his head cloudy, which leaves a big question hanging over everything he does next, and the long, strange absence of Daeron. For ages the show kept name-dropping Alicent's fourth child, the prince fostered in Old Town with a dragon, always mentioned, never shown, until Season 3 finally brings him into play. And while he's here now, that long delay was conspicuous enough that it's worth flagging as a lesson in how this show operates, planting a piece and then leaving it off-screen for a very long time before it matters. Same with the North. Cragen Stark pledges for the Blacks, and then the enormous northern host mostly stays over the horizon, a promise the show keeps making before it finally starts to cash it. Loaded guns, all of them, but you do feel them sitting on the wall a long while.